When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, "Who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb?" But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. "Don't be alarmed," he said. "You are looking for Jesus, the Nazarene, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone, because they were afraid. The picture we have at the beginning of this chapter is one of complete despair. The women were carrying the spices to embalm Jesus' body and worrying about how to roll away the stone from the tomb. Their master, whom they believed to be the Messiah, had been condemned and put to death by the Roman authorities with the assistance of the leaders of their own people. It must have seemed that all their efforts, all their commitment, and all their faith had been in vain. These women were still in the dark, even though Mark appears to tell us that the sun had risen. But then they look up, and they see that the stone has already been rolled away from the tomb. Sometimes, when we are lost in despair, we multiply one problem upon another, and it is only when we look up and stop focusing on the problem that we can see that God has already provided the solution. When they enter the tomb, they find a young man dressed in a white robe. There is little doubt that he is an angel, a messenger from God. And he immediately answers their question before they ask it. They are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. But he is not there among the dead. He is among the living. The phrase, "he has risen," translates one Greek word which means "he has been raised." Jews at that time, as today, tried to avoid mentioning the name of God, so "he has been raised" would mean God has raised him up. The angel points to the place where his body had been lying. He was no longer there. He was living. And he had left them a message. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus had told them he would be stricken and the sheep, his disciples, would be scattered, but that he would be raised and after that would meet up with them in Galilee. The angel tells the women they should go to Galilee and they would meet Jesus there. Why Galilee? Is it because that was where his mission started and now it had to start again? Or is that the place where mission can happen and Jesus is leading them into mission? Mark doesn't make that clear. So the women leave. Or rather, they flee. They are scared stiff. This might seem odd to us. They have just been told the wonderful news that Jesus is alive, and they run off in fear. But if we try to see things from their point of view, they have just seen an angelic being and been told a lot of stuff that does not make sense. It is only natural that they are confused and terrified. And if we are honest, we perhaps ought to admit that we would have reacted the same way. We sometimes find it as difficult to receive good news as we do very bad news. It takes a while to sink in, though sink in it does, eventually. The really odd thing is that this is where Mark ends his story. The two alternative endings you may find in your Bible are not there in the earliest and best manuscripts, or even in some of the later ones. And where they do appear, there are markings to suggest these endings were not part of the original text. People in ancient times thought this was an odd way to end a gospel, so they sought to provide a more fitting conclusion. So did Mark intend to finish here, or did he intend to go further? The honest answer is that we do not know. That may resonate with us also. We cannot see the way forward any better than the women in the story, and we may be just as confused and frightened as they were. But the women must eventually have spoken to somebody, or there wouldn't be a church anywhere today. So maybe the message is to listen to Jesus' call and to obey, even when it doesn't seem to make sense and when we can't see where it will end. Trusting that he will bring all things to a glorious conclusion in his eternal kingdom.